The road was empty when the first blows landed. Timothy Coggins tried to run, but the men closed in, fists and boots coming from every side. He fell to the ground, arms raised in instinctive defense, pleading for them to stop while the attack continued. The beating was methodical and sustained, not a sudden burst of rage, but a decision carried out step by step. By the time they paused, his face was swollen beyond recognition, his ribs shattered, and his strength nearly gone. Chains were produced. The night did not end there. It carried him forward toward something worse. Timothy Coggins was a 30-year-old black man living in the rural outskirts of Rome, Georgia, working odd jobs and known among family as quiet and good-natured. On the evening of December 19th, 1983, he went to a small store near the town of Somerville. Rumors had circulated about a theft earlier that day, and without evidence or confirmation, a group of white men decided Coggins was responsible. Their judgment was not based on facts, but on race and opportunity. They did not contact law enforcement. They gathered instead, arming themselves with chains, rope, and the confidence that they would not be stopped. Coggins was confronted, accused, and struck before he could explain himself. Witnesses later testified that he was beaten repeatedly, kicked while on the ground, and forced to his feet only to be knocked down again. A chain was wrapped around his neck, tight enough to control him but not yet end his life. He was shoved into a vehicle and driven away from town, deeper into isolated countryside where darkness and distance offered protection to those committing the violence. Along the road, the abuse escalated. Coggins was dragged behind the vehicle, his body scraping against pavement and gravel. The dragging lasted long enough to strip skin from his legs and torso, leaving blood along the roadway. When the vehicle stopped, the beating resumed. The men were not in a hurry. They acted with the certainty that no one would intervene and that their actions would go unanswered. The group eventually reached a wooded area near a rural road. There, the chain around Coggins's neck was secured to a tree. He was lynched and left hanging. When his body was discovered the next morning, the injuries told a story authorities initially hesitated to confront. Medical examination revealed extensive blunt force trauma, severe abrasions consistent with being dragged, and fatal compression of the neck. This was not an impulsive killing. It was prolonged, coordinated, and intentional. Despite the brutality, the initial response was slow. Local authorities struggled to build a case, and responsibility was diffused. Fear spread through the black community, reinforced by the knowledge that acts resembling historical lynchings had occurred within living memory and often without punishment. For months, there were no arrests. The silence signaled to many that the system was unwilling or unable to confront what had happened. Pressure from civil rights organizations and public outrage eventually forced a shift. Federal investigators stepped in, recognizing that the killing constituted a violation of civil rights. As the investigation progressed, witnesses began to come forward. Some had seen the assault, others had heard admissions after the fact. The wall of silence began to crack under scrutiny that extended beyond local boundaries. Arrests followed. Several men were charged in federal court, where prosecutors laid out the sequence of events in detail. Testimony established that the defendants had acted together, reinforcing one another's intent and escalating the violence at each stage. The racial motivation was made explicit, not inferred. The crime had been committed to punish and intimidate, not to seek justice for any alleged wrongdoing. The trials were painful for Coggins's family, who listened as the final hours of his life were reconstructed piece by piece. Photographs, medical reports, and witness statements left little room for doubt. The jury returned guilty verdicts for civil rights violations, resulting in death. The sentences reflected the severity of the crime, sending a message that such acts would not be ignored when federal authority was applied. In the months after the convictions, the community around Rome and Somerville remained divided. Some residents expressed shock that such violence had occurred so recently, while others downplayed the crime or avoided discussing it altogether. For Black residents, daily life carried an added weight. Parents warned children to be careful after dark. Ordinary errands felt dangerous. The memory of Coggins's death lingered as a reminder of how quickly rumor could turn lethal. Civil rights leaders pointed to the case as evidence that the legacy of lynching had not ended with earlier generations. The methods were the same: accusation without proof, mob enforcement, and an expectation of silence afterward. What differed was the era and the assumption that such acts no longer happened. The federal convictions challenged that assumption and demonstrated that progress, where it existed, was fragile. Legal proceedings continued after sentencing as defendants pursued appeals, arguing technicalities rather than innocence. Courts rejected those efforts, reaffirming that the evidence supported the verdicts. Each ruling reinforced the principle that racial violence designed to terrorize a community constituted a federal crime, not a local matter to be quietly mishandled. For Coggins's family, justice remained incomplete. No sentence could account for the fear and pain of knowing how he died. They spoke publicly about his life, not only his death, insisting that he be remembered as a person rather than a symbol. Memorials and public discussions kept his name from fading into statistics. Decades later, the case is still cited in examinations of hate crimes and civil rights enforcement. It stands as a warning about what happens when prejudice is combined with authority unchallenged by accountability. The road where Timothy Coggins was attacked looks unremarkable now, but the history attached to it has not disappeared. The murder did not occur in isolation. It was the product of attitudes passed down, tolerated, and occasionally encouraged by silence. Breaking that silence required intervention from outside the community where the crime occurred. Without it, the killing might have joined countless others left unresolved. The story of Timothy Coggins remains relevant because it underscores how quickly ordinary people can become participants in extreme violence when fueled by hate and reinforced by expectation of impunity. Remembering the details matters, not to sensationalize suffering, but to recognize warning signs when they appear again. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.